So one thing that was present in our last class's lecture was the fact that we had 3 lights placed in our scene, but we didn't really go over those yet. So let's touch on what those were and what purpose they served. So I'm just going to open up my checker texture, and I'm going to turn off the checker effect just so that our viewport's a little bit cleaner and a little bit easier to understand. And so if I jump into my camera, check my render settings, alright, that's fine. So if I click render, we're obviously not seeing a whole lot. So first things first, I think that we are going to want to get a glass material set up for our bottles, because that sounds like a good idea. Currently you're only seeing the label, which is a little problematic, because this would be like a magic bottle. So on our bottle, now we could go through the content browser and search up glass, but I have, luckily, glass material on hand, so I will bottle glass. So I'm just going to copy this from last semester's, and then we'll walk through what it's doing. So it will be important to note the way that I want to stack my materials in the case of the bottle. If I just switch my display, is remember our tags work from left to right, and when you're building up a layered kind of system, you want to think of what order these are stacked on top of each other. And what we see is currently on the bottle, our shaders are backwards, because it should be the glass and then the label on top of it. And so right now we have the label and then the glass on top, which is the wrong way around, so we'll just flip those. And then if we just click render, let's see what this looks like. So this is sort of a brown tinted glass, kind of. So let's jump into this. So one thing to note when you are doing something that's glass, typically, unless it is a stained glass, and even then maybe not, you would want to uncheck color, typically. Most of our materials we use the color channel. Glass is a little bit different, so we want to think about going about it differently. So we don't need to use glass, or we don't need to use the color channel, sorry. So we can uncheck that. And our friend here, pretty self-explanatory, will be the transparency channel, so we want to check that on. And there's a couple of settings that we've edited within this tab. The default, one of the most important aspects of glass is this refraction value right here. And if you've ever held up like a snow globe, or like a thin glass, like a light bulb, or even like a pane of glass, you'll notice that different thickness and different types of glass will bend or refract the light differently. Obviously, my bottle here is going to look a lot different than like a frosted plate glass window like on your basement, you know, like those little tiny windows right above your basement, like on the side of your house. Like those are very thick types of glass, for example. So those would have a refraction value closer to 1.6, whereas a thin type of glass, more along the lines of like a bottle or a smaller window, would be like 1.5 or 1.55 in this case. So I will just change this back to 1, which is the default value, and you'll see in the render that this doesn't really look like glass. It looks more like plastic. It looks like colored plastic. And if we raise this value, I'll just raise it up to a couple kind of random numbers, we'll start to, actually, I want to render these to the picture viewer, so that way we can do a little before and after. So just bear with me for a second while I set up a couple of these renders. One thing to note is this value does kind of slow down your render because it is a more intense effect. And we're causing the computer to think a little bit more. Oops. Basically what this index of refraction value is, and it's based on like a real value, so you can Google, like say you were trying to make a diamond, you could Google diamond index of refraction and you can find out what number you should set this number to, and because this is like a scientific value and it's tied to the way that the light is bending throughout the object, kind of if you've seen the Pink Floyd album, like The Dark Side of the Moon, where that light, the white light is going through the prism and then the light is separating into the different wavelengths of color, that is an effect called caustics, which is related to index of refraction. Basically, the reason that prism is changing the colors of the light is how thick each portion of that prism is impacts how the light is behaving. And that index of refraction value, as we can see here now that we have a couple values to flick through. So this is 1.0, the next one is 1.25, next one is 1.4, and the bottom one is 1.55. So as we flip through these different values, we'll see the fact that this glass is looking more and more glass-like to our eyes. It's reflecting more, and it is altering the way that the light is interacting with it, kind of particularly you'll want to note along the sides, along the glancing angles. That is a pretty important part of nailing a believable form of glass in 3D. So yeah, that's kind of index of refraction. So if you're doing some sort of glass, your value will probably be between 1.5 and 1.6, and you just kind of want to play around with it and explore this value with whatever you're doing, maybe like for your juice glass or whatever. Another thing to take note is this absorption color. Now if you want a tinted form of glass, this is more than likely where you would want to achieve that tint phenomenon, that the color of that tint, the absorption color.
So is that like a swatch or something?
Yeah, so this is a color, you can click it and you've got your normal RGB controls. So typically you want to make this the color that you want it to tint. In some cases, in some weird cases, you actually want to do the opposite. So like on the color wheel, if you want a red, sometimes you would put a blue in. Because it's kind of dependent on the render system. This value gets interpreted differently by different programs. Sometimes you set it basically as an artist, I say, okay, I want to make brown glass. My beer bottle is brown because beer bottles are brown, and there's a reason for that, is it helps preserve the chemical composition of the beer as opposed to a clear type of glass. So the bottle itself is indeed brown. I want to make my glass brown. So in the render engine in Cinema 4D, it's set up in the way that you're telling it the color you want it to be. So in this case it's brown, and in other programs sometimes you tell it the color to absorb, and actually it's doing the opposite. Cinema 4D is doing the opposite of this, it's just in a more user-friendly manner. It's kind of like trying to think of another way, another analogy of this. Nothing quick is coming to mind.
I kind of get it, because we know that we see something as red because everything else is being absorbed, and that's what's bouncing of that color with your eyes.
Correct. That's a good point. So if I hold up this blue stuff. In real life, this is absorbing all the colors except for blue, because it's reflecting back to you blue. So we see this as blue because only the blue color of light is coming back to us. So thank you. That's a good way to describe what this absorption color is. So sometimes you set it to the color you want, and other times you set it to the opposite of the color you want.
So you could set it to the color that you would like it to be, and then maybe render, do the quick render and look at it and adjust it
and see if it's right. Yeah. So I think for the most part, everyone will want to set it. If you are using a tinted glass, set it to the color that you want, just within the basic Cinema 4D. The last thing that I want to touch on is in the Reflectance channel. Now we'll have a new layer right here. Because we have the transparency channel checked on, we will now have a specular transparency layer, which will be new to us because I don't think we've really done much glass up to this point. And I have changed this roughness value ever so slightly. I've got a value of 5% in mine currently. And if I change that down to 0 and I just do a render, we'll be able to compare with my most recent render what that's going to do for us. It's pretty subtle. Like most things in 3D, the effects are kind of hard to see one at a time, but if you do maybe 20 of these small steps, then all of a sudden you've made a huge leap forward in terms of how accurate or believable your render is. So this is, you'll really notice it along the reflections on the side here. So this is 0 roughness, and this is 5% roughness. So take note of what the shape of the can looks like in these two reflections. With the value that I have a little bit of roughness enabled, we definitely see some sort of change in how much detail is present in this reflection. Now in real life, almost nothing, and when I say almost, I mean actually nothing, is 0% rough. Like even really, really, really brightly polished chrome is still a few percent rough. You'd have to have some sort of magic metal for it to be 0% rough. So chances are a small percentage will go a long way. If you had something that was really, really, really rough, like a scratched, like foggy glass. Why the word is escaping me. I'm imagining like a chess set frosted glass. That's the word. Like so, frosted glass is what we would most encounter in our daily whatever kind of surroundings. Something that is one of the most roughest types of transparency of something that we see, and that frosted glass is only like 20 or 30% rough. So something that is a tiny bit rough, like a clear beer bottle, is only a couple percent, whereas nothing would be like 100% rough is kind of what I'm trying to say. Even like the most roughest glass you would see, which would be frosted glass, is only like 20 or 30, maybe 40%. It's like you wouldn't crank it all the way up to 100, because then you wouldn't see anything. What can we move on to next? I think we can apply the label to our cans. That would be a good next step, I think. Because right now I just have two types of metal, and I can actually go through these pretty quickly. These will be very similar to the metal that we put together for the title sequence assignment. So we've got our good old reflectance channel here.
This is what the can.
Yeah. So
texture?
this would be like an aluminum kind of metal can. Yeah, a spoon, if you're doing the breakfast scene, a spoon would be pretty similar to this. So we've got an extra layer here in our reflectance. We've got our default specular, and then on top of that I have a layer that I just named Reflection. But the settings for this were a GGX. Now remember, for the most part these top four are they're all pretty similar, but I just picked GGX at the time. In this, metal is a little bit of a different story than a glass, for example. A roughness value of 30 or so percent for an aluminum can is not like that wild, really. So if I, oopsie daisy, if I just zoom in, I just want to zoom in on this can so that we can kind of observe some of its settings. So this, right, let me turn the lights on real quick. So this isn't a super reflective can. If we look up aluminum can, so an aluminum can is maybe, this is like a good example of what I'm going for. This doesn't have any super clear kind of bright reflection to it. There's no like kind of mirrored, like, you know, if you were standing in front of this can, you wouldn't be able to see yourself in front of it like it was a mirror, you know, like super clear. So this is kind of the look that I'm going for, which would be pretty similar to Spoon or whatever. So really we just messed with the roughness of this. Not too complicated to make a pretty basic metal. What else? Well, I've been kind of avoiding these lights, so I guess we'll just jump into what these different lights are. Now, we have set up lights in the past. In the desk scene, we've gone through the settings for the light themselves, which is an area type with area shadows. So that's not really too new to us. Another thing to keep in mind is kind of the size or the shape of the light. Typically in product photography like this, which I'm about to go over kind of the philosophy of what a three-point light is in terms of like a photography kind of background. Well, what a three-point light is it's like a super basic setup for how to light an object. So if we just Google three-point light setup, this is a pretty good illustration. So we've got our cool subject here, and this is sort of our camera. So what a three-point light is pretty self-explanatorily. It is a setup that involves three lights, 3 points of light, and we have one bright light, which is usually on one side of the subject. It's not directly in front. And then we have a fill light, which is on the opposite side, or sort of the opposing corner of where the key light was. And then we have a backlight, which is typically the weakest of the lights, and that is just going to give a little bit of lighting information and shadowing that's coming from the back. And I pretty much directly replicated that, like so. So if I just real quick turn that off, just so that we can see these. So if I'm looking at this from above, I've got a key light, which is my brightest light source at, I believe, yeah. So this is my brightest light at 100 intensity, and coincidentally it is my smallest light in terms of its size. And then I've got my fill light, which sometimes would be replaced by a bounce card, one of those big like reflective kind of sheets, if you've ever been in the photography room. So this is sort of off to the side. Again, if I look at these from above, so where are we? So this is kind of like the setup we have. So this was this was our key light, this is our fill light, and then our rear light or rim light kind of goes by a couple names. This is the one that's in the back of our subject. And typically the rear or rim light and the key light are on a, they're in a straight line of each other. They're pretty much kind of 180 degrees across or opposed from each other. So we can see right here the key light, and if I kind of draw a line kind of out in the direction it's pointing right towards the rear light. So enough of why those are placed where they are. Let's just jump back to the settings on them. So one thing that I just changed and want to change back is this setting here, which is the fall off. Now this is something that I don't think we've used up to this point. But what the fall off is it is a realistic setting. Let me just kind of drag this up so that everyone can see it. Trying to raise this up as high as I can, but kind of struggling. So the setting we want to use is inverse square, physically accurate. Luckily, it just says physically accurate for us, so that's makes it a little bit easier to find. Not to get too scientific or boring, but pretty much all lights, well, not pretty much, all lights in real life, they're radiating energy. Light is a form of energy, and that energy weakens over the distance that it travels. So that's why if we had only one, like that one light in the very back of the class, if that was the only light in this room, you would really only be able to see for a couple feet around that light. You wouldn't be able to see me all the way here at the front of class. If the door was closed and all the other lights were off, projectors, all the other monitors, the light back there would be relatively weak or almost non-existent by the time it reached the front of the room up here. So that is one of the settings that we want to take note of when we are trying to achieve a realistic style. And when you set this setting on for the first time, you will notice this big orb that appears around your light. So if I just turn that off, so we've got we have the normal kind of light that we know and love with these little orange little squares to control how big it is. But when we set this to inverse square, we now get a orb, as we can see, and this orb has handlebars of its own. And this is basically how we're telling the program how strong we think this light is, basically like what its range of effect is. And typically it'll reach a little bit beyond where this orb is. So I typically just like to set the range of this orb on my object, because if I set it like super far past it, we'll just look what this is going to do. This is going to super duper overexpose our scene. It's just going to be way too bright. If we have this sphere of effect, this area of effect, if it goes too far past the object, it just makes stuff too bright. And we're seeing that because now everything that is in direct light, like the box here, the floor, and the front and tops of our cans, is just purely white. This is just way too bright. So if I undo to shrink back the fall off of this light, we can see I've positioned the handle on this fall off to be basically right amongst my objects. And this is a good method, I find, for giving your scene an appropriate amount of light.
So the direction of the fall off, the thing that you're going to affect and put on there, is your z-axis?
Typically.
Okay.
I mean, this orb extends in all directions, because the fall off, you can put fall off on like Omni lights and spotlights. You can put fall off on any kind of light in Cinema 4D. This isn't unique to just the area light.
Okay.
Although the area light is unique in that it is emitting light in one direction, which, like you said, is the Z direction.
Okay.
But this little handle thing works in all directions As you can kind of see, it creates a globe around our object. And then I think the last thing, actually no, I think that might be it as far as the lights. And again,
all three, they're all three area lights?
Yep, they're all three of them are area lights with area shadows. Really, what is changing between them is the intensity. Well, one, the size, because some of them are bigger than others, and then the intensity. And the intensity I'm using is matching, it's matching what that sort of internet source said, which is a pretty good rule of thumb when it comes to photography, in that you want your key light to be your main bright source of light, and then the other lights get proportionally weaker. So when we look at this diagram, this one says key light brightest. Obviously Cinema 4D, or this image isn't, you know, based off of Cinema 4D, so it's not going to tell us the exact percentage. But we see that this fill light here, this is saying like 50 to 75% of the main light. If the main light's at 100%, then we can set this one to 50%, which I have pretty closely mirrored. My fill light is at 48 in my case, so yours might range, you know, maybe a little bit higher, maybe a little bit lower. And then this backlight, in my opinion, this is missing one tiny little piece of information, and that is that the backlight is usually a third the brightness of the key light, and so mine reflects that as well, coming in at about 30%. Technically a third would be 33.3 repeating, but that's fine. So with all that photography science mumbo jumbo out of the way, we can go back to texturing and making materials. I think I'm really only just missing the wood texture from my box, because in my research looking up craft beer photography, there was lots of wooden tables and wooden platforms that the items were set upon. It creates a nice kind of contrast with the wood and the glass and the metal of the beer. It kind of just makes for a nice composition. So if I open up my project from last semester, I will grab those textures and show you what we have made. So we've got a wood grain base. Now I more than likely just found this by typing in wood texture, probably wood plank, because in the case of mine I wanted to recreate kind of the effect of what a wooden box would look like, but I didn't want to go through the labor of making a wooden box, so I probably grabbed something that looked like this, where it's got divisions amongst the wood. And I took that into Photoshop, and I did a couple things to it, because up to this point we've used wood grain, but we haven't really gone to the full extent of what we're capable of when it comes to the other parts of a material. And what I mean by that is the bump map and the specular or reflection map. Now if you really analyze wood floor, this is really good. So this image, I would love to recreate this to a T for my image. Okay. So there's a lot going on here that you, as an introductory 3D artist, are seeing but not picking up on. Really, we've got three things here, or maybe more, but we'll break it down into three. We have obviously our color channel, or our normal color texture. So that is the different stripes and the different shades of brown and tan that we've got going in this wood. And then additionally, the next thing we've got is our bump map, which we've worked with a little bit. But in the case of something like wood, there are bumps that come as a result of the wood grain. So certain parts of this texture where we've got either knots in the wood or like cuts or scrapes, like we've got a knot there, and then we've got this scuff or this scratch here. These are also causing a bump. They're causing like a little dip in our bump map. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is the fact that this wood grain also has a reflection that is unique to the wood grain. So if I can zoom in on this full size. So really what I'm saying is it's most evident on these two planks, this plank right here and this plank right here. Now this portion of this wood plank is a lot more reflective than this little slice next to it. This little piece of this plank is less reflective. Same thing's kind of going on over here, and we can generate all of this information that will give us kind of more detail and more believability pretty simply in Photoshop. So let's try that. So this is kind of all over the place, this layer. Alright, so this will be our color. So what do I want to do to generate this stuff I've been talking about, this bump map and this reflection map? Well, first off, I want to duplicate this layer, and I can just do that by hitting Command J. And this will be, I'll do bump map first. Bump texture. So I'll just turn the bottom layer off. Now, bump maps that we've used in the past, they are all grayscale. A bump map is something that you want to use an image that is white and black. You don't want to use a colored image in your bump map. So I'm just going to use a hue and saturation node, and then I'm going to pull all the saturation out, and this will convert this to a white and black grayscale image. And I'm just going to make sure that I'm clipping this, the hue and saturation, to the bump by holding down Alt and enabling the little clipping mask arrow. The next thing that I want to do is I want to exaggerate kind of these differences in whites and blacks, and I'm going to do that by doing a levels, I think. Again, I'll clip this, and a levels adjustment. One moment. Where are preferences? First rule of Photoshop is to always enable overscroll, so that way I can pan over here and keep my layers open so I can see everything that I'm doing at once. So I'm just going to pull in this white and black, and what this is doing is in the case of like this wood, it's making sure that these strips between the planks are very dark. It's also darkening up this knot, which would kind of be recessed, kind of knocked down from the surface of the wood. It's also helping to roughen up some of these other surface features. Yeah, so something like this is pretty good for the bump. And now I will generate the reflection or specular texture I'm just going to duplicate everything that we've done so far, hitting Command J, or Control J, and then I'm just going to flatten what I've got selected with Control E. So this will be specular texture, and in this one I'm just going to do a little bit more work with the levels, and I'm just going to make this a little bit more exaggerated, a bit more dramatic. I want really bright whites and really dark blacks in my case, because I want kind of a rough, really rugged, like manly wood crate. and then I'll clip this again. So I want to turn these layers on and off one at a time and save out. So I would Control Shift S, save out my wood grain. So I would just select, probably just use JPEG for now. So this will be wood grain base. Cool. Obviously we want to make sure that we've got as much quality setting as we can in our texture. So that's all good. And then I'll turn my next one on, which is my bump. Save this out as well. So this will be wood grain bump. Cool, JPEGs are fun. You can use TIFF or PNG. It's kind of whatever you like using. Not the end of the world if you use something differently than me. Although probably don't use like a GIF or a PSD as the actual texture. That wouldn't be the greatest idea. So then this will be wood grain specular. Cool. So we generated these things in Photoshop and we haven't done anything with them yet. So let's do something with them. We'll just create a new material and I'll name this wood crate. And in my color texture, I'm going to load an image and go back to my text folder. So this is my wood grain base. Cool. So that's looking the way that we expect it to. Next thing I'll load is my bump. So again, I go load image, and I want, crap, which one's which? I think this is the one that I just made.
No. Yep, sounds
Bump. Date taken.
They both say the same thing.
Modified 1 minute ago. Modified longer than. Okay, so this is my bump. Although I could have swore that I just made it dark. Whatever. Whatever, we'll figure it out.
Reflectance is the specular.
Yeah, so we'll do probably a Beckman for now, and then in reflection strength, so this is where we want to load an image, and this will be October. Today. Okay, so this is the one that I want. So obviously this is like a whole heck of a lot of specular, or heck of a lot of reflectance. So I'm just going to pull this reflectance strength down a bit, I think. There we go. And then in my case, because I'm using a color channel, when I'm setting up my, this will be reflection. When I'm setting up my Beckman, I want to change this attenuation setting. It's probably defaulted to average. In my case, I want it to be additive because I want my reflection to go on top of the color channel, because if I leave this on average, we see that this is just like black. This is clearly not wood up here. So the setting to fix that is changing attenuation to additive, and then now this is looking something more along the lines of what we were expecting. But it's a little bit too polished, so I'm going to want to add in a little bit of roughness. Now one thing that you can get creative with is using a copy of either your bump or specular texture in the roughness. I think I'm just going to see what this looks like without doing that at first. And then, oopsie daisy. So let's just render this and see what this looks like. What this table looks like. So pretty basic. Yeah, pretty basic so far. So we've got to tweak some stuff a little bit more, I think. time being, I'm just going to hide my bottles and stuff so that way I can just focus on the wood. Alright, so we're getting a little bit of a reflection that's coming off of our rear light. But one thing I think that I want to do is I want to pump up our bump map a bit more, just so that I'm getting some more of this rugged quality. And it's a little bit too glossy still, a little bit too reflective. So I'm going to pull this reflection strength down some more even, I think, and roughness up a little bit more. Just because this is currently looking like it's like wet, it's like been lacquered. Yeah. So that's just like a little bit too much, I think. Actually, yeah. So this one I made a little bit of a mistake. I want to leave up this reflection strength right here, and I want to pull down the reflection layer up there, I think. Yeah. So this is giving me a lot less of a bright, kind of a white hit directly on this light, but it's still retaining some of the reflection amongst the rest of the wood. It's kind of just a little bit of a trick within the program. Not something that I expect everyone to catch on to on their first try. But one last thing that we can do to give our wood a little bit more believability is by scrolling down and going down to this layer Fresnel setting. And what do we want to set this to? I think there are some presets depending on different types of objects. A lot of these are names of metals, but I think, what are these different values going to be set to? Let's just pick one and see kind of what we wind up with. So what a Fresnel is it's the way that the light kind of glances off. Now, we're definitely seeing a glancing reflection because of that light that's back there. So we're going to see the most kind of effect of what this setting has right in this corner as I pick all these awesomely named words like telluride and tantalum. I kind of like the way that looks. This would looking a little a little bright, but not too overdone. So I think we'll call that for the wood. Would be a good time to save my project and save a version just in case something goes corrupt or something goes crazy on me. And I'm not doing anything to the UV mapping for this crate because I'm leaving the crate as a still a primitive cube. And actually in this case, leaving it on UV mapping or cubic, cubic is not probably the one that we want. No, not so much. So we're just going to leave that on UV mapping for the time. If you have a little bit more complicated of a platform object, like maybe you've got like a kitchen table or something, a little placemat with your breakfast scene set up, with some silverware and like a bowl and all that, maybe you'll go a little bit further than I went with my crate. Up to you though. So I think I'm pretty happy with the crate and the lighting. So I'm going to turn my objects back on and kind of just being picky about the way that these are facing. Just going to rotate these ever so slightly so that it looks like they were kind of placed and arranged on this table a little bit differently than they are now. So clicking render, let's just kind of look at what we've got. Our bottle is looking pretty basic, and one thing I'm recognizing now is I have a beer bottle with no beer in it. No, that doesn't make for good advertising. So we're going to take a little bit of a break. You guys can get up, stretch, go to the bathroom, do whatever you want to do for 10 minutes. So we'll regroup at 6:05, 5 after, and we will fill up our bottle. And we're back. So this is where our render leaves us off. We're at a pretty good stage. I'm really happy with the quality of the metal on the can and our wood crate going on. Label's looking pretty good, but I want to do a little bit more to this glass. This is feeling just a little boring still. So I know there's some more that I want to do to it before we fill it and add the caps, obviously. And one of those things is introducing more reflection into our scene. Basically giving our glass, because our glass is giving us such a wide look around our surroundings, because it's so curved, it's kind of looking, you know, in 360 degrees. We want to give a little bit more interest to that reflection, and one of those ways is something like this, where we're introducing more light into our scene via an environment or an HDR. So I think we touched on this maybe briefly in the title sequence when we were setting up a metal. We went through how to go into the content browser and search up an HDR. I think hopefully this jogs some memory. So we're in the content browser and we type in the letters HDR, which stands for High Dynamic Range. Content browser is on the right hand side over here.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you have the student version at home, you might have no or very limited content browser contents.
I actually have it here. So
But if you're here on the school computers, you should have full access. So typing in HDR and then hitting enter to search, we will find a whole bunch of stuff. And what these are, just to go back over kind of what they are, is these are images. Oh yeah, sorry, to get to the little search bar you want to click the little magnifying.
HDR enter.
Yeah. So what HDRs are they are images.
There's none.
Yeah, if you're using the student license, it won't have any. So what you can do is open it up here. I'll get to it in a second.
Okay.
So what an HDR is, HDR. So what this is it is a panoramic image taken, and they typically have a lot of lighting information, hence the HDR-ness, which is a photography word that means it has very bright lighting information. So you can search for something specific, like maybe you're doing breakfast in I don't know, Dr. Doom's lair, and you want to find a really moody, maybe like a dungeon or, you know, an underground lair kind of setting for your scene. So you could search up a specific HDR that kind of finds or suits your needs. But I've got a pretty basic idea in mind, so I think the content browser will get the job done for me. So I'm looking for something that is kind of like warehousey, maybe sort of industrial, fits this kind of rugged, sort of manly crate thing I've got going on here. And I know that there are some that will suit my needs here in the content browser. So if I found one, I can double click it, and chances are it will open up in the picture viewer. And so this is where it comes in. If you have the student license, you won't have these HDRs on your student license, but you'll have them here at the school using the school license. So
you can't just, I can't just go find one of those somewhere?
you can find one online, but the ones that come with Cinema they're there and they work pretty well.
Okay.
So you don't need to venture out.
So can I load
You
those?
can, yeah.
Okay.
So if you find one in the content browser that you like, you double click it, and it'll open up in the picture viewer, which is where we render. You know, this is where our rendered files go. But we've got this HDR, and you can just go to File, Save, and you can save this. I'll do it. So I want to save a still image. I can leave all this other stuff alone. Hit OK, and I can save it into my text folder.
Oh, okay.
And so this way, I can take this home and I can load it up. So if I make a new material, again, the way to set up an HDR is we want to uncheck color, uncheck reflectance, and check on luminance, because we want to use this as a light. We don't want to use this as color, we want to use this as light. So luminance channel is the channel for us. So I can load my texture, and right here save it to my folder. I can load in this HDR, and let's just apply this to our scene real quick. So this will be HDR texture. Just name my stuff and stay diligent. So if I just apply this to that environment object, and again, you can make the environment object by clicking on this box here, and then there's an environment. So if I render to the picture viewer now, we'll render my image, and we'll probably see a whole bunch of craziness at first. So we'll just sit here for a second and let this think.
So I could open 3D, go in there and like pick out a couple, save them, put them on my drive in my texture folder, and then I've got
take them home.
I can go get them.
Yep.
Okay.
That would be, I would recommend doing that if you have it set up so that you can work at home with the student license. That's what I would recommend doing.
Because those 4 videos you've got will cover pretty much everything you've done, right? That's cool.
So this is like a little bright. It's a little loud. Thinking it's just giving me a little bit too much. It's doing some crazy stuff on my cans here, and there's just a little bit too much going on in the bottles for my liking. So I'm gonna cancel that. And in this luminance, I'm probably just gonna pull the brightness down, and then see what that gets me. If it's still too bright, I think I've got one more trick up my proverbial sleeve. This is the fun part of 3D. This is where you go check Instagram or look up cat pictures on Reddit or something. Do whatever you like to do in your free time on the computer. But do that on your free time, because this is class time. No cat pictures here in class. Unless your render looks really good and you're like, Billy, just believe me, my render's awesome. You're gonna be blown away. Yeah. Then maybe we'll work out a deal. So yeah, this is still too bright. Pulling down that luminance, oopsie daisy. Pulling down the luminance of this didn't really do what I wanted it to do. So what I'm going to do then as my backup plan is click into this texture, and I think I'm going to lower the exposure by quite a bit. And we'll see that this lowering the exposure is making this image a lot darker. Let's just try -8. Too far. really don't want it to affect the way that my scene is being lit, because right now it is. I really just want it to be there to serve as a little bit of bonus kind of reflection in my glass. Because I was pretty happy, or I am pretty happy with kind of the shadowing I've got going here. I really like the composition kind of from a photography standpoint. I'm pretty pleased with what I've set up here. If you had, your cereal box and a bowl and some juice and all that, you could arrange it pretty nicely on a little wooden crate similar to mine. It would look pretty nice, chances are. Yeah, so I think this is more in line with what we want. There isn't like this crazy reflection stuff going on inside of the can and on the front of the bottle. It's a lot more toned down and sort of subdued. And if we go back to our original render, it's not really affecting the way that my lighting and my shadows look, which is what I was aiming for. It's just giving me a little bit more kind of oomph here in the glass. So I'd say I'm pretty happy with the lighting setup as it stands. I'm liking this. So what else is there to do? Well, if we look at the cans, we see the cans are looking pretty early 2000s video gamey. We really don't have a whole lot going on here with the little pull tab and the little cutout part. This is looking pretty junky. If you would really like to learn how I modeled this can, definitely jump back to my lectures from last semester, because I made this live. Wasn't too complicated, but there's some modeling tricks there. But if a can's not relevant to you, then by all means skip it. So how do we fix this then from where we're at? Well, one thing that should be super easy, I think, is if we select our can and we put it in a subdivision surface. So I'm gonna make my subdivision surface and hold down Alt while I do so, and we can see that definitely helped out the look of my pull tab a lot. If I hit Q and undo, we can definitely tell that this is helping me out in making my can look nice and round and not like an abomination.
Why did you change your label?
That's a good question. So, let's see. Yeah. So, if we turn on our display lines, so the way that a subdivision surface works is it's trying to smooth out what we've got. It's basically adding in, to kind of describe it like the pen tool in Illustrator, imagine if you just had a bunch of like sharp points, like not with Bezier curves. You just had a bunch of just points. You can kind of think of the subdivision surface as adding in Bezier curves, like adding in handlebars onto each of your points. It's trying to smooth out your object, and that gives us, that's a pretty good example. That what we've got here are a bunch of hard points, rigid points. I'm just hitting Q on my keyboard to turn this on and off, and so it's going from hard, sharp points, kind of old video gamey, low polygon, and when it's on, now it's rounding it out, it's smoothing it, it's like it's averaging out, it's adding extra detail. But the unfortunate side of that is that it is adding more lines vertically as well as horizontally. And what you're seeing here with when the UV map, the label is changing, is because this line right here, which is my dividing line between my brown label and my silver can up here, I see that I don't have any other line below this breakpoint. Basically, this last line right here is the separating line. So I can fix that by going into my pen tool and going to loop, and I can add in an extra loop over here if I add a loop in there, this isn't going to disturb my UV map because I've already done the UV mapping.
Would you need one at the bottom too?
I will. Yep. So I'm going to add one at the top and add one at the bottom. And this now is no longer disturbing my UV map. If we switch this back. Well, it's doing a little bit in here actually, so I need to add in a couple more lines. Yeah, I probably need to add in a line along the 50%. So I'm going to do my trick where I hit shift and I can type in 50%. And it's still squashing it a little bit up there. So I'll probably do one more. So I'm tapping shift on my keyboard and I can type in 50 and punch in a cut there. One more down here. And the reason I'm doing 50% cuts is I don't want to disrupt like what I've got, and adding in cuts in increments of 50%, basically on even divisions, whether that's 50%, 25%, 75%, whatever, you avoid causing those disruptions. Whereas if you make a cut at 42.6%, you may in some cases disrupt kind of the shape of what you've got.
Okay.
So 50% is usually, when in doubt, you know, that's a good kind of rule of thumb. So I think this is looking pretty close now, back to what it should look like. So I'm pretty happy with that. So this is can subdivision surface. And alright, now I think it's a good time to save. And then tackle the fact that my bottle is empty. So I want to fill up my bottle with some sort of liquid, and there's a couple ways about going how to do this. And I think probably the easiest way to show you all in class is by taking the bottle that I have already. And Sean might have done this when he showed how to make the juice glass, maybe. So I guess I'll just do it and you guys can tell me if this looks familiar or not. So I'm going to make a copy of this bottle just in case I mess something up, and I'm going to solo it. So I'm going to call this beer liquid. I'm going to delete the materials off of it for now, so I've just got to clean.
You copied the bottle?
Yeah, I just made a copy and I'm just soloing it. And what I want to do is when we were UV mapping the outside, we were selecting certain polygons out here, but what I want to actually do is go inside, and I want to select all these polygons that are on the inside of the bottle, and I can do that pretty easily by using my loop select. And so what I'm doing is I'm selecting the very bottom of the bottle, and instead of like sitting here and like shift clicking like a whole bunch of these, because there's like a kajillion edge loops here, there's a command that I can do that will expand one loop outwards. It's called grow selection, and that is under U, Y, all the way down at the bottom. And what that does is, we'll just zoom in. So if I hit U, Y, we'll see that each time I hit it, it's going to increment my selection out one more. So I can just hit this a bunch, just have fun on my keyboard, and we'll see how far out we got. One thing that would probably be handy is to switch to lines mode, and this will let us see through the bottle. Now typically beer bottles are filled up to about a point up here from the brewery, so I'm just going to expand up a couple more. I think that's a good point to stop. That looks pretty accurate. So if I switch back to this line mode, we can see that I'm selecting the inside of the bottle, and now I want to turn only this portion into my liquid, and that's a relatively easy thing to do if I do my split command. So that is under U, P, split. It's kind of halfway down the list. and that will make a copy over here in my object list. I know the second one is the copy. So if I solo this one up now, I'm left with just this inside of the bottle. Now it looks pretty similar because the bottle's, you know, pretty symmetrically shaped, but this is just the inside, and I know that for a fact. So now I can do, I want to close off the top because the liquid, we want to think of the liquid that is poured into this bottle as a solid object. It's got like a top, sides, and a bottom. So I can do my Close Polygon Hole tool. I think it's been a while since we've used that. It's under MD. So I can click to close the top of my liquid. And now if I hide that one, which was the original, and we select that one and this one, and solo these, we'll see that we now have an object that is, it looks like it's within our bottle, which is right exactly like what we want. Obviously it's white, it kind of looks like a milk bottle right now, not a beer bottle, but that's fine. We can add a material to it. So this one is the one I no longer need. I'll just drag that down into my old folder, my junk drawer. So this beer liquid should be all I need. And if I jump back to my scene from last semester, I just want to see how I made this. So we've got our bottle liquid. If I apply that to that, we'll see that it's going to turn transparent in the viewport. And that is because, again, we're using transparency. And at this time, I know that I'm going to want to change my refraction value to 1.33, because 1.33, repeating, is what the value of water is, and for the most part beer is water by content. Obviously it has other chemicals and flavors and ingredients, but it's for the most part water based or liquid based. I'm not like a beer chemist by any means, but from a 3D standpoint we can treat this as if it is water. So I think the only difference is I changed this absorption color. I brightened it up a little bit more because I think I was going for some sort of like a Pilsner or an ale. I wasn't going for like a very dark stout. So if you're a beer person, you'll know what those words mean. If you aren't a beer person, those words just described different colored, different appearing beers. I think that's a pretty simple way to sum up that. Obviously they taste different, and beer snobs will want to pick an argument with me down in the comments when this video gets uploaded to YouTube. But just we're going to try to keep it simple. So we've got our liquid inside of our bottle, which is great. It would be a good idea now to just parent those together just in case I move the bottle, that way the liquid follows with it. We wouldn't want our ghost liquid to kind of phase outwards from our bottle. Like this would be pretty bad. So what else are we missing? I think just the cap to our bottle.
Can you render that so we can see what it looks like?
Sure.
I'd like to see what the beer in there looks like.
So hopefully we'll see a very distinct difference between where the beer is and the beer isn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this maybe looks a little bit darker than maybe what I was shooting for. This does look more like a stout. Or this actually kind of more looks like Coke.
But you've got a brown bottle too, so that's going to change the appearance.
I do. So maybe let's actually brighten up this absorption color. Let's just jazz this up and just see what we get. So I'm going to do a render region, and that way I can just differentiate, or I can point out a very specific portion of where I want this to render. Still looking very dark. So it doesn't seem like me editing this material is having a whole lot of an effect when I'm expecting it to, and I think why is because it's a little abstract of a concept to think of, but in 3D, no two objects should occupy the same exact point, because in real life, no two objects occupy the exact same point. And what I mean by that is the method in which we made our liquid, the outside shape of the liquid is exactly on the point of the glass.
So you would have to shrink it in
A teeny tiny bit, yeah. So actually, that is something that I want to do. So I want to grab my beer liquid, and I can grab my scale tool, and hopefully, what is a good camera to do this in? So I'm just going to solo those two one more time, hopefully. And we'll see if we can visualize this or not. So I've got my beer liquid, and I don't want to scale it vertically. I only want to scale it, in my case, in the X and Z directions. So I'm going to grab this corner handle, and I'm going to just try to shrink it to like 99.5%. So just like a teeny tiny bit. Now if you pay attention to that orange outline, the one that's will be present right along up here, if I hit Control Z and Control Y, we'll see that this is an ever so small difference. But if I jump out to my camera and I this one, I want to be careful with how I move my cameras, because I made a little goof. Yep, so now these two viewports are locked together, so it's bad. Hold on, we'll work through it together. There we go. All right, now we're back. So we're in our camera. Good. Oopsie. So I want to do a render region, which can be found by just pressing on the middle button, long pressing. And this is doing something now because we're getting a lot more color than we were. It's looking a lot sort of warmer and brighter. It's almost kind of looking like a rum, as opposed.
Tell on this projector.
Yeah, it's a lot more apparent to me, particularly right here. It's very like ruby colored on my monitor. Apologies for the projector, but hopefully it'll be visible on the lecture. So I just want to adjust this absorption color a little bit more, I think. And if I raise this absorption value, this is basically telling the absorption distance is almost kind of like, in the case of a liquid, it's kind of like how cloudy or like how opaque this liquid is. For the most part, a lighter beer, like what I'm shooting for, is not too opaque. It's not too kind of dark or hard to see through. Like if you were making like a murky swamp, like imagine like murky swamp water, that would have a very low absorption distance.
So like the difference between a lager and a wheat.
Yeah. So
the wheat's going to be cloudy.
Yeah. So if we just watch this material preview, if I change this from 75 down to 5, we'll see that 5 made it look very, very black. It's almost like you can't even look into this object anymore. So I'm just going to leave it at 75, hopefully, and we can call this good enough. I just want it to be a little bit brighter. It was just making it just a little bit like too dark and too cramped kind of looking. On its initial setting, it was almost black, which was not doing it for me.
You can definitely tell there's something in there.
Yeah, so I think that's, that'll be good enough. If you're doing something like orange juice, where it's a very bright orange liquid within a clear glass, you're not going to run into this kind of issue that I am, where I'm working with two very close too closely tinted colors, This is I would rank this kind of somewhat high on a 1 to 10 scale in terms of like how challenging it is to kind of pull off a setup like this where you've got two tinted tinted liquid within a tinted glass, and they're sharing the same kind of color. If we had like a pink and a green, you would be able to tell these apart all day long, but because we've got two browns or two values that are like kind of within the brown sort of gold family.
How would the same thing work if you were trying to put like water in a glass?
So water, you probably wouldn't be tinting the color very much, if any. If you would, you could maybe ever so slightly go very, very like a little bit blue, or maybe like a little bit kind of like a seafoam greenish aqua. Something like, something like not even that. That's too much. So something like this maybe. So water would not have much tint to it at all. Like, especially if it was like a clear, like a boutique water, like Fiji water or something, that would be like very clear and, yeah. So I'm just going to undo this back to, I think, my beer color. And then like a bottle like this would not have any tint to the glass material. I mean, this is plastic, but just pretend. So let's do a render to the picture viewer and just see what we're working with kind of in full quality, just to make sure that there's nothing that we want to go back and fix. One of kind of the somewhat annoying things is the more complicated and the more sort of advanced your render gets, the slower it'll go. So we can see like my initial render was 2 minutes and 2 seconds, and then at one point we hit like 2 minutes and 20 seconds. These ones are 0 because they didn't finish completely. So this one's like 2:14. The more and more kind of complicated and complex we make this, we might hit like 3 or 4 minutes on the render. Which it's not the end of the world when you're doing one frame at a time like we are for this assignment. But like in the next assignment, when we're doing an animated, we're doing like a drone, like a quadcopter. That's a bummer when you've got to render like a couple hundred frames and each frame takes a few minutes. That's like depressing. So I think there's some stuff that we'll want to do to the render to save ourselves some time on the next assignment, but I don't think we have to get into those quite yet. Well, they have. Let me see if I found one of these on eBay. Anyway, long story short, they're thousands of dollars. This is a used render server. Let's just see if we can humor ourselves. The one I found was like super duper impressive. It was like $5,000 and it was like 1,700 cores. This computer has 12. So 1,728 cores. If we just break open calculator. 1,728 divided by 12. It's approximately 144 times the strength of this one computer, and for the entire thing was like only $5,000. Granted, the thing weighs like 3,000 pounds. It'd be pretty hard to like get that into your house. Chances are you'd need to like reinforce your basement or like your floor or whatever. So this stuff is expensive.
It's kind of unrealistic for the home person.
Yeah, I mean the one that I found would be pretty impractical to run on your own, like in your own house, but you could like start up your own render farm website and rent that, like rent, because there are online render farms where you can send, like companies do this, like sometimes our company does it, where you send your scene to a website because they have a ton of computers or servers or whatever, and they'll render it for you, and then they give you back the rendered images because it goes quicker. Because for them it'll take like a couple minutes or a couple seconds, and on one computer it'll take like hours or days to render something. So that like might be the use for a 1700 core server. You know, starting your own home business. But with all that out of the way, I think this is looking pretty good. I'm liking the way that this can right here looks, but the can over on this side still has the super low polygon, old school pop tab. It's not that the subdivision or the instance is referencing the wrong item. So we can see here, this can number 2 instance is referencing the object called can number 1, which is the original low poly can, but we want it to be referencing the can that is in the subdivision surface. So if I zoom in on this one and I undo and redo, we'll see now that this is the instance can. It's now referencing the right object, which makes us happy. And I think I will just real quickly make the bottle cap, which isn't too complicated. So we'll grab one of these bottles and solo this real quick. And I think an easy way to do that is by using the disk object primitive. And if we just zero out its position. So that disk is, the cap is now at the bottom, which is not where we want it. We want it up at the top. And the texture is kind of going crazy, so I'm just going to apply our basic metal to it real quick. Cool, that looks great. So how do we shape this into a cap? Well, first thing will be to make it editable. And then, actually, before we make it editable, I want to remove some of these disk segments here, because I know I don't want all those just yet. So now I can make it editable. And if we look at what a bottle cap looks like, it's always, I really like to stress reference images. That way we are capturing kind of the right amount of detail. It's a completely flat top, and then it kind of rounds along. We've got a little bit of a bevel. It rounds down. Oopsies. And then it comes down, and then we've got these ridges along the bottom. So let's work that out one step at a time. So we can select our edge, and we can extrude this kind of out and pull that down. So this will get us the fact that this goes down and curves down, and then we can select that and bevel it ever so slightly using our bevel tool, and just edit the settings, give it a little bit of roundness. Cool, so this is already off to a good start, I'd say. Now the next thing, or even maybe the last thing left to do, will be to add these ridges. And if I just roughly count and get an idea of how many ridges to add, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm counting a quarter along the way, and then I'm just going to quadruple my number. Instead of counting all 28, I can count 7 and then times by 4 if I do it in a quadrant. So if I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oopsies, 7. That's not quite getting me all the way to a quarter. So I think what I want to do is I want to subdivide this object a little bit more. And there's a command for that under U-S subdivide, kind of towards the middle here. So if we hit that, we can see that it, if I undo and redo that command, we'll see pay particular attention to the spots in the middle, that it's giving us extra sets of lines, which I think will be what we want. One thing that I do want to do up here is I think I want to try to optimize some of these, because I think this is just giving me a little bit too much. And I'll see if I can find the right number. Yep, that is just destroying. Nope. Alright, last try. Oopsie. 3. Alright, I'm gonna give up on that. So maybe we won't subdivide. But I want more edges along here. So I'm in a conundrum. This is a moral question I have to ask myself. How much do these ridges mean to me as an artist? And the answer should be a lot. If I'm striving to make this as realistic as possible. So I think I've got one other trick that I can try, and that is under M, I think F, which is edge cut. I think, how do I use this tool? There we go. So it was hard to see what I just did, but I hit M, F, and I've got this edge loop selected, and if I click and hold on this, I can see that I'm making points. We can see the little point vertexes along this. And if I switch to point mode, I can see that I made those points. Cool. So now I think what I want to do is, oopsie, these are a lot more curved and kind of more detailed than I've got time to recreate. So I think I'm just going to try to scale these in. Or out. Yeah, I'm going to scale these out. And this should give me close enough, if I just name this cap. Now obviously it's a little bit too high up, and it's probably too big, because the cap would want to fit pretty snug on the top here. So I think that looks pretty good. I'd say let's always check it out in the render. We'll want to check our instance. Oh, I think it looks good. The same way that we had to instance our can. Yeah, we've got a cap on each one. So we can do a render region up there. And I mean, it's not the greatest, but you know, they're there. And when I do a render in full size, I'm pretty confident that I'll be able to see those little ridges once we make this big scale. Because this render is like 1/8 the size of our final render, so we're going to be able to zoom in really close and really look at these details. So I think we're done as far as the scene goes. We've done our lights, we've done a bunch of materials, objects. Hopefully you've got a cool breakfast box and a bowl of cereal and maybe like a spoon and some juice, a couple objects, whatever floats your breakfast boat. So we can jump into the render settings, and the pretty standard stuff. We've done most of this before. We set up our width and height in inches before, and I want to make sure that my resolution, or DPI, is 300 for this assignment, because we're kind of replicating a printed product render, and professional printing is at 300 DPI. So I want to jump down to my save menu and set up this stuff. So I want to make myself a render folder. this assignment 3 chicken product. Pretty standard stuff. We can render TIFF. That's all good. I want to still do name.number.extension. And then over here on anti-aliasing, we want to do best, which we've done before. And there's an extra thing down here that we haven't messed with before. This one's called Ambient Occlusion. And this is an effect that gives us a little bit more kind of realistic, or it's simulating more realistic lighting and shadowing. Definitely in the case of like the fruit bowl, with all of like the little fruity pebbles or whatever you've got inside your fruit bowl, it's going to add like a little bit of extra shadowing and stuff to those objects. You'll see it in your render once you enable this. And to enable it, you want to click on Effect, and it'll be visible in your list for the first time. It's not visible because I've already added it. So I clicked Effect, and then you'll click the word Ambient Occlusion. It'll probably be right here because this list looks like it's in alphabetical order. And Ambient Occlusion starts with an A. So, and we don't have to really do much to the settings. We'll learn about those some more in the last assignment. We'll do a little bit of a deeper dive there. So I think we should be done, ready to render. So I'm just going to do one full, or one preview render here in the viewport one last time to make sure that I haven't like missed anything, or I've kind of blanked on something that I wanted to do. Maybe all of a sudden I want to like model an apple and add an apple into my breakfast scene. You know, it'd be a good idea to do that before you start your final render, because then otherwise you won't have an apple. If you want to add that. This is looking pretty good so far. We already know what the top of the bottle is going to look like because we just looked at that when we were doing the cap, and I know what the rest of the wood down here is going to look like because we observed all that stuff when we were doing the box, which we haven't changed since then. So I'm pretty happy with this. I don't feel the need to make you guys sit through however long this will take to finish. So we will start the final render, render to picture viewer, and this will take a good chunk of time. Definitely budget in your mind as long as an hour to render the image. Obviously every scene is going to be different, and the number of objects you have and how complicated the materials are in your scene is going to affect how long yours will take, but don't be surprised if it takes like a solid half an hour, or 45 or 60 minutes. So definitely don't start this at like 7:50 on Thursday night, because 10 minutes will probably not be enough time. So I'm going to pause the lecture here, because this will, you know, probably go right up until the bell. Maybe, who knows. If it finishes faster, then sweet. If not, then oh well. So I'm going to pause the lecture, and then I'm just going to let this sit here, and then I'll come around and help you guys all out. And if this finishes, well, then we'll go through the very last step, which is just a little bit of Photoshop color correction and kind of a little bit of image enhancement if we get to it. If not, then we'll wrap that up on Tuesday. Alright, so my file finished rendering, and everyone is left by this point in class, so we're just going to cut this lecture short. We'll pick up the recording on Tuesday, and that'll be that. We'll finish up the product.